It's time for At Your Service, the service management podcast from CRM Audio with Microsoft Business Applications MVPs Sarah Jelinek, Scott LaFonte, and Sean Tabor. This episode is brought to you by Resco. Resco is a leading mobile solution for Dynamics 365. Resco Mobile CRM is an invaluable tool for the field service engineer working in field service for Dynamics 365. Other solutions from Resco include Route Planner, which combines geographic and calendar data, even taking into account variables such as traffic and weather to ensure that your agents plan the optimal route to their work sites. Resco also offers inspections, which allows you to create, assign, and complete field service inspections with ease. We thank Resco for sponsoring At Your Service, the service management podcast from CRM Audio.
Welcome to another episode of At Your Service, the service-oriented podcast from the CRM Audio Network. Once again, I am Sean Tabor, and with me, as always, I have my co-host, Scott LaFonte. And today, Sarah is off on assignment. She is not finding herself. She's simply on assignment doing something productive. And in her stead, we have two guests to talk about all things universal resource scheduling today, and that's Reham Darwiche and Meghan Reed. How are you ladies doing?
Doing good.
Good. Glad to have you on the podcast. It's always nice to have a few new voices on the podcast. People can get bored of me and Scott. Never Sarah, but yes, they can get bored of me and you. Yeah. So, reason why we wanted to have you guys on is there's a lot of updates happening to universal resource scheduling pretty much monthly. Dan Gittler and his team do a great job in really pumping out new capabilities and functionality within the product. And we have a lot of stuff. We talked about it on the last episode. A lot of stuff coming in the April release. But what I wanted to talk about is just universal resource scheduling in general and get some thoughts on what you guys have been doing with it or wanting to be doing with it, either in previous implementations or things you got going on right now. And because it's really become, to my mind, it's really become its own separated product, which was the intent, right? It's more than just field service. It's more than just project service. Now with the in preview service scheduling enhancements, it's really becoming the engine that it was meant to be. And that's really exciting to me because there's a lot of opportunities there, and especially with what we're going to be able to do soon with Power Apps in it. So let's start with Scott. Scott, I know I'm saying a lot of kind of preaching to the choir a little bit, but what are your thoughts on that? How are you approaching universal resource scheduling different than you may have in the past?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's almost as if, we look at all the different areas now, right? You have sales, customer service, field service, kind of project services out there somewhere trying to figure out where it wants to be. And, Microsoft focuses on now focus on a specialization instead of a generalist. I see almost scheduling becoming part of that within each of those areas. Right now, because in the past it was, it's field service. You got a schedule board. Okay, great. Drag and drop. You can do some things. Yeah, there's RSO, but it was still kind of in its infancy state. And now with all of the changes, you got all the different kinds of functions that you can schedule, groupings and scenarios. You can do a lot of visual what if scenarios now with RSO. I'm approaching it more as if scheduling in and of itself is, you have to approach it from projects that I'm on as almost like a little mini project in and of itself, right? Take, for example, field service mobile. Anytime there's field service involved, I look at, you have to do the mobile piece, and you got to carve out time for that. Well, now, because we can do so much within scheduling, you're kind of almost getting to that same point, except that Dan and his team have done a great job by saying, we give you all the tools and you can do all your tweaks and what have you, but you still have to take that time and understand all of the features that are in there, because like you said, every month there's great new features coming out for it, and staying on top of it is a challenge.
Well, and from my perspective, and I'd love to hear Reham and Meghan what you think about this. When you're dealing with requirements in terms of scheduling, historically it's been, okay, I have activities that I want to engage with my clients. It could be phone calls, could be appointments, could be what have you, right? But now there's a new kind of paradigm shift to my mind, to where you have to ask an additional question in that regard to say, okay, is this being scheduled, or is it like an activity and an appointment, right?
Right. I
So,
agree.
yeah, it really adds to the mix. So what are your thoughts on that?
So it does. I mean, it's definitely a little bit of a challenge for some of us. I think especially focusing in field service, it's hard to separate out, it's always been, it began there. It was sort of that traditional field service route and making sure that you scheduled work orders. And now, because there's so much more, a lot of people are kind of grouping it in with some of those activity types that were in CRM since the beginning. And so, at least for me with projects, I try and think about all of the uses for the schedule board, and then really try and segment them out by the different departments. So focusing on sales versus service versus field service. And that seems to go a little bit better so that you don't get lumped in with the traditional activity types and the out-of-the-box Outlook selection.
I agree with Megan. And the challenge there as well is that some clients or some of the projects that you're on don't even think about it in terms of this as a scheduling concept, right? To them, it's probably just another activity or maybe another visit or another appointment or just another demo that I have to conduct. But you, as a CRM person, as a person who can configure and know all the tools in the toolbox, like you always say, Shawn, it's more of now it's your turn to ask those investigation questions to really say, you know what, this will work in our new URS functionality.
Yeah, it's exciting, yet it's at the same time you're like, okay, wait, when do I ask about that, and when do I not? Because I don't want to overcomplicate it, right? I don't want to confuse the customer, but it's a very valid concern now, because they're not even going to think initially about the schedule assistant or the ability to book someone on a service activity, for example, or even if it's a custom entity. Like, let's say you have professional services, right? And you're going to go out to do an assessment for an SOW. Well, that's not really field service, right? But someone's time is being booked. They're going out somewhere. They're traveling. So they're kind of being dispatched, but it's not field servicey, right? So those things you would have just been an appointment on an opportunity potentially for a sales pursuit. Now it has a whole new dimension.
So I guess it does, but now from your perspective, do you see that as a good fit for the schedule board, or is that still one of those scenarios where you think, it should sort of maintain what it's always been and not necessarily go into the schedule board?
It depends on the organization and how they're wanting to see those people. So, for example, I used to work in financial services, and you could have a situation where you have a new client and they come into your practice, and maybe you have some junior wealth managers and they need to do some work, but Outlook isn't necessarily the end all be all for what their capacity is, right? So it's a difference between a resource and an appointment, right? So if they want to see that kind of dimension, then this is applicable, because then you're able to also start going into things like with the bookable resources and the characteristics. Can this junior wealth manager talk about long-term planning? Can they talk about college funding? Can they talk about Um, what's another one? Can they talk about retirement planning, right? All these different things. Can they talk about annuities? You can then start going into that detail and then find the best junior resource or wealth manager to take that client on, especially if you get into situations where you may want to bring a client on, but they don't have assets at a certain level for maybe some of the larger or bigger wealth managers in your practice, for example. So you really have to. That's why I'm saying it's a totally different dimension. You got to kind of have to think in another way on how these things can work for you, because there's so much capability and so much functionality in it. You know, it's. I see your point though, because initially you're thinking, all right, just schedule an appointment and go do it. But now it's the whole. Now you have the skills, the characteristics, all of that kind of good stuff. So it's like opening up a Lego set. Well, you know, I have all these new bricks. What do I want to build? That kind of thing. But something at the last Dynamics 365 Saturday that Ben Vollmer said is kind of resonating for this conversation. The difference between an activity and a booking, to Ben's mind, an activity is something I do to myself. A booking is something that's done to me. So think of it that way.
That's a very true statement.
Right? So when you're dealing with these requirements for scheduling, is it something that I'm doing for myself that only I need to care about? Or is it something that's being done to me or against my record that I need to take action on? Is someone scheduling it against me? It's one of the things we've always ran into historically for Dynamics, and that's that whole delegate permissions to be able to schedule stuff and track it in Dynamics, right? That's always been an issue. It's always been a problem, especially in financial services. But universal resource scheduling breaks that mold. Now the difference is, to my mind, connecting that with Exchange. That I'm still working through, but you know, it's a whole new platform. Maybe Exchange isn't so important anymore.
Well,
But
I agree with you, Shawn, because when you think about URS and you think about the whole scheduling aspect inside of Dynamics, and you brought up using it in wealth management or financial services, you see how Microsoft and the whole field service team is trying to embed themselves into industries and into functionalities that we haven't thought about before, right? So you mentioned financial services, I say hotel management, maybe hospital management, maybe offices, conferences, whatever it is. You see how now maybe everything is really rolling up on your schedule board inside of Dynamics. So maybe you don't need Exchange anymore, like you just said, because at the end of the day, Exchange is showing you a picture, like you said, of you and my activities. Whereas me, as someone who wants to oversee a whole department, I cannot just see all their Exchange calendars, right? I need to go to
right,
somewhere that's bigger and broader, and hence URS on the schedule board.
right. So what are some of those features in universal resource scheduling that really have kind of lit a fire for you and really make you want to explore a little deeper? Could be new features, could be existing features, could be types of scheduling. Doesn't matter. And it, you know, could be field service, project service. Doesn't matter. What is out there that you've either implemented or are looking to implement soon?
Yeah, I'll go first. Why they're mulling it over?
Sure.
I'll jump in. You know, for me, it's more because I've been on so many field service projects. A lot of the scheduling that I do is with resources, individuals, maybe some equipment. I really want to get into some of those other aspects of now, and some of the projects I'm getting onto is more crews and a resource pool, where we're starting to look at from a pooling perspective, where they seem to be going. And I had this conversation with Ben last week, was around capacity planning, right? So when you look at scheduling to a resource pool, you're really looking at, well, what's the capacity? And, some of the features that are coming out are those ones where we kind of hold back some capacity for emergencies, kind of like what maybe sometimes doctors' offices do. They'll leave slots open available for emergencies or sick visits that are unscheduled. So holding back that so that we're not overbooked, at 100% capacity. Those are some of the scenarios that I'm really looking forward to getting into, as well as some of the new RSO functions that hopefully once someone at Microsoft, Ben or Dan, can get me an RSO license, I would appreciate it and love you guys forever.
You had to go there, didn't you?
I did, absolutely.
Yeah, don't worry, I'm going to cut that out.
Yeah, that's right.
But no, those are good points. I mean, I personally haven't delved too much into RSO outside of the super high level, but there's so much capability there, separate and apart from URS, that it's what you said earlier was you could really have a specialty in scheduling, and that's true.
Yep. I mean, if you look at even the release notes for April, I mean, the whole Canvas Power App, they're providing a sample Power App from a scheduling perspective. So Microsoft is seeing, they've heard from us, they've heard from customers about, customer self-scheduling, or even, for example, you have partners out there, or maybe there's so many different situations now with customers and their vendors and everything else, is that you have to provide that flexibility. And so now with that, hey, being able to schedule out of a Power App, I mean, think about that. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Right, and this goes back all to the fact that, as I said, Microsoft is really seeing the need to have this little tool called URS or scheduling be a broader thing that's used across different organizations, right? So now I'm going in and to, let's say, some sort of a requirement gathering, and I don't have to look into sales and service anymore. I'm looking broader than that. I am thinking there's a lot more potential than just sales and service. So like you said, I can go there and confidently say to someone that we have these features like the Power App, like the self-service scheduling API, where you can go yourself or your client can go in and they can schedule their own appointments. And with that, I mean, think about, like we said, when you go to book a hotel, right? You go online, you book your room, and you're good to go. Well, now we can think about hotel booking and room booking via URS as well, with like facility and pools, like you said. You are easily able to do that within CRM, which in the past, I don't think we've ever imagined that we can do that.
So now, kind of going on that same line, as far as the Power App, I mean, that's very exciting, and hopefully it'll add a lot of functionality and features. But do we think there's any risk with customers getting excited about some of these features and starting to sort of explore them without really thinking through the long-term impacts of using the universal resource scheduling and having someone to manage those resources and the setup and organization that's required for some of that information?
Did we lose Shawn? Shawn went to go find himself.
We did. His headset has died, and he's done with us.
No, I mean, you both raised some really good points about URS, and I like Reham's response of this. Microsoft providing this little tool. It really is. I mean, granted, it's not so little, but it is a tool. It's this functionality now that I think we've just kind of learned to at first it was like, okay, we've learned to grow and love it when it was field 1 and it was scheduling, and there was things that we couldn't do, and we were like, oh, God, when is Microsoft going to do this? And that product team has really gone strong in terms of making it be a valuable, productive piece of everyday life for anyone that uses D365. Hopefully at some point, and I'm sure this is probably the way that they're going, that scheduling piece will get pulled out and it won't be necessarily required to have field service or project service with it. I think that's the one caveat that, some customers that might be more customer service and sales oriented and not so much project or FSA, like, oh, I have to have that. Well, yeah, kind of have to. But I see that as the way it's going, right? And now that we see it with being able to, power apps, there's, talks of course, Portal with customer self-scheduling. I see that more and more as the going into that kind of, well, if you want URS, here, this is a SKU for it. It's a separate install, and, away we go. And I think that's the start, what we're seeing now, because when you use the unified interface, we see, the scheduling piece is separate. So I think that's, something, I don't know what the two of you think about that in terms of the direction, especially as it goes with, projects that you're on, what you've seen, what's your vision of where you think or would like, URS to go?
So I'm in agreement. I think that, realistically, Microsoft kind of has to go broader, especially now that they've provided so many of the new features. So as far as some of the things that we've talked about, like, for example, the crews and the pools, there are so many organizations that could utilize that it's a whole new market for Microsoft, and keeping it tied to field or project service, I feel like is really restricting some of the things. I can think of quite a few scenarios where customers may not need the field or project service entities as a whole, but they do want access to the schedule board. And so a great example of that that Reham and I have talked about before is hospitals. They don't have that typical either long-term project or service aspect, but they do have a great use for crews. So they also can use the facilities and being able to schedule rooms, and in turn using, like we were talking about, how they could use crews to schedule surgeries. So you need a doctor, you need a nurse, putting those all together. But selling that to someone who works at a hospital currently is a little bit too challenging. So I feel like if Microsoft makes it more available, and that's the direction they're going, we have more capabilities and more functionality to really specialize in the schedule board.
Right, and I agree. And when it comes to like thinking about using URS or outside of the typical, and I'm air quoting, you can't see me, but the typical field service implementations here, and like you said, Megan, hospitals, you think about industry-specific tools that Microsoft's trying to compete against, right? So you have your industry-specific hospital tools, your industry-specific hotel booking tools. These are the go-to tools that most of these industries would start using. But as you mentioned, as URS starts becoming, like you said, Scott, its own tool, its own thing, you log into your unified interface and you see it as its own standalone. I don't see why not this is becoming the go-to piece for those kind of industries.
Yeah, and some other things to think about, right? I mean, if you look at it from a scheduling perspective, and you look at it, you take it outside of the web UI or unified interface, and you look at it, down the road from a portal perspective, right? I mean, we as customers, from a B2C perspective, I mean, the possibility of using scheduling where us individuals as the customer can use that to self-schedule us for whatever it may be, doctor's appointment. It could be scheduling to have, technician come out for our cable. It could be, really just about anything if you think about it. So any organization that uses scheduling for any sort of capability, B2B, B2C, internal, maybe even like internal training classes, right? How many spots are available? How many have been already booked? All those kinds of functionality that we think about, are now becoming reality without doing a lot of customizations or even configurations. So I think we can start diving into those situations, and even things like gyms when they schedule classes, and you have all of this, hey, I want to schedule this class. Is there still a spot available? Oh yeah, look, there's a spot available. Okay, great. Then we go and schedule that class. So those kinds of things, I think, are really opening the doors where 2 or 3 years ago you wouldn't even think about doing that, because it was very difficult.
Right. And CRM was confined in the sales service marketing space, right? Where now it's more of this A to Z solution that you really can discuss confidently with your client, saying, yeah, you can have all of that in one app. Because today, typically, you would see like a lead management tool that the client use, a financials tool that the client use, and then you have your booking tool, let's say. But now you can say, you know what, you can have all of these in one place. Literally, one place.
Yeah. Now let's before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about both Reham and Meghan. You guys are kind of on this path where you guys are actually presenting, I believe, I think it's the end of May at a conference, and one of your topics is just this: universal resource scheduling. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that conference is, and what exactly you guys are going to be presenting for our customer, our listeners out there that may be interested to see what the two of you have up your sleeves?
Sure. So Meghan and I have this customer conference that we're going to be presenting at, like you said, end of May. One of the topics will be how a certain organization can leverage URS and cut through here. Please edit this side right here.
Joel, edit point.
Joel, edit point. Okay, where do I restart from? I restart from...
Take it from the beginning. That's fine.
Okay. So yeah, Meghan and I are going to be presenting at the customer conference at where we work at the end of May 29 till May 31, and one of our topics is going to be how to maximize the use of URS. And Meghan, I'll let you talk through some of the examples that we have in mind, but realistically, it's going to be how URS, like we just talked, is not going to be only for field service, right? It's more than that.
Yeah, so we'll be in Atlanta for a couple of days. And like Reham said, we're going to do one of our presentations on universal resource scheduling. And we're going to focus a lot on all the new cool stuff that came out. So it'll be very colorful and a lot of fun features. We'll do some fun scenarios around hospitals and things that are kind of been mentioned here that are outside of the scope of the field service. And it should be a lot of fun, I think.
That's fantastic. I think it's a really great conference. So it's the Hitachi customer conference that Reham and Meghan are talking about, and I really would like to see where this entire scheduling story winds up going, and not just what you're presenting, but of course what Dan Gittler and his team have up their sleeves. Of course he won't tip his hand, and that's okay. But they really, like I said, they really do listen. So if listeners out there are seeing some pains, or more than likely seeing scenarios that are coming up over and over again in a particular industry or a specific function that seems to be missing, and you keep coding it, definitely go ahead and get that to Microsoft. We'll go ahead and put a link up to how you can submit your idea, so the team can go ahead and take a look at it and evaluate it, and folks can go ahead and vote on that to see if that's something that'll make it into the product. But definitely have your voice be heard, and expect more great things from Dan and his team. So I think we're just about out of time, but I wanted to let you guys, Meghan and Reham, just go ahead, like one last parting kind of comment about, what you think in terms of, your thoughts on URS. If you had to just give one sentence about URS and the importance of it, what would that be?
You're putting us on the spot like that, Shawn, Scott, but okay. I guess my one thought about URS is that we use URS today in your life. Like every day when you are talking to your colleagues and other employees and trying to find the right resource for the job, you are doing it day to day, whether it's just sending emails back and forth, trying to find someone on your Active Directory list, whatever it is, you are doing it one way or another, regardless of what your industry is. So just taking that and implementing it in a physical process where you can report off of it, you can have it be more efficient, more true, more realistic or real results, so to speak. It's going to be really good, regardless of how you look at it, regardless of what industry you're in.
Excellent. Thank you, Reham. And in typical consulting fashion, we can't do anything with one sentence, but I expected that because I couldn't either.
Right? Yeah.
And
Meghan, what about yourself?
So I think Reham said most of it, but I guess what I would say is for universal resource scheduling, it's what's expected. We're getting to a point now where your customers are expecting, like you said, you want to be able to look before you go to the gym to see if the classes are full. And universal resource scheduling lets you do that. And so it's there. It's a tool you should be utilizing. And we're definitely going to be paying close attention to all the new things that come out in next couple of releases.
Excellent. And definitely everyone keep an eye out for the monthly release notes. Because even though we are approaching April and the rollout of the April 18 functionality over the course of the next several months, still expect some functionality to be released sometime here in March. And with that, I think we're at a wrap. So I know that Shawn has gone on assignment to literally probably try and find a better set of headphones. So I will say goodbye and farewell to everyone for this week at your service. And thank you, Meghan and Reham, for joining us. I definitely appreciate your insight. And we will see you all next time on At Your Service.